You don't live here anymore." Those were the first words my daughter-in-law said when she opened the front door of the house I had called home for 34 years. For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. I stood there on the front porch with my overnight bag in one hand and my purse in the other, staring at Ashley as if she were a stranger. The afternoon sun was still warm against my face. The maple tree my husband planted 20 years ago swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked exactly the same. Everything except the lock. My key wouldn't turn. I had spent the weekend visiting my older sister in Springfield, just a 2-hour drive away. It was the first trip I had taken since my husband, Robert, passed away 8 months earlier. My sister insisted I needed a change of scenery. She said I needed a few days away from the memories. Maybe she was right. But standing there on my own porch, I suddenly wished I had never left. "Ashley," I said quietly, "what are you talking about?" She crossed her arms. Her expression remained calm. Too calm. "I think it's better if you leave, Margaret." Leave. The word felt strange. Heavy. Like it didn't belong in the same sentence as my name. Behind her, I could see my living room. My blue armchair sat exactly where I had left it. The family photographs were still on the mantel. The quilt I made during Robert's retirement rested neatly across the couch. Every inch of that house carried pieces of my life. "I live here," I said. "This is my house." Ashley gave a small smile that never reached her eyes. "Not anymore." My stomach tightened. I looked past her, hoping to see my son. "Where's Jason?" I asked. "I want to speak to Jason." "He's busy." I immediately reached for my phone and called him. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Same result. My hands began to shake. Not from anger. From confusion. From disbelief. Then I noticed several large plastic storage bins stacked beside the garage door. At first, I didn't recognize them. Then I saw my winter coat folded inside one of them. My photo albums were in another. My clothes. My shoes. My memories. Everything carefully. Packed away as if I were someone who had moved out weeks ago. The sight stole the air from my lungs. I walked toward the bins slowly. Ashley didn't stop me. She simply watched. "You packed my things?" I asked. "We packed what we thought you'd need." "We." Not I. "We." That single word told me everything. Jason knew. My son knew. I looked down at the wedding photograph sitting near the top of one container. Robert had his arm around me. We were both smiling. Young. Hopeful. Certain about the future. Robert used to tell me this house would always be my safe place. He had built that promise one mortgage payment at a time. One repair at a time. One sacrifice at a time. Yet here I was, standing outside while someone else decided whether I belonged. Ashley glanced at her watch. "You should probably find somewhere to stay tonight." I slowly lifted my eyes and looked at the new lock shining on my front door. That's when I realized this wasn't a sudden decision. This had been planned. Carefully. Quietly. And whatever was happening, it had started long before I left for that weekend trip. I did not argue with Ashley. Looking back, I think that surprised her more than anything. She was prepared for tears. She was prepared for accusations. She was prepared for a scene on the front lawn. Instead, I simply stood there for a few seconds, looking at the house Robert and I had spent more than 3 decades building together. Then I picked up my overnight bag and walked back to my car. Ashley said nothing as I left. Neither did I. The drive into town felt longer than it ever had before. My hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but inside, my thoughts were racing. I kept replaying the last few months, searching for the moment when everything had changed. The truth was, things had started changing long before I found myself locked out. I just had not wanted to see it. 8 months earlier, after Robert passed away unexpectedly, the house became unbearably quiet. Every room carried reminders of him. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet beside mine. His reading glasses remained on the nightstand for weeks because I could not bring myself to move them. The silence was not just the absence of sound. It felt like the absence of gravity, like the center of my world had disappeared overnight. At first, Jason and Ashley seemed supportive. They visited often. They offered to help with errands. They insisted I should not worry about maintaining the property alone. I remember feeling grateful. Jason was my only child. Seeing him step forward during that difficult time brought me comfort. But little things began happening. Small things. Easy things to dismiss. Ashley started speaking about the house as if it belonged to everyone instead of me. She would say things like, "We should renovate the kitchen," or "We need to update the guest rooms." At first, I assumed she was simply trying to be helpful. Then furniture started moving without my permission. Family heirlooms disappeared into storage boxes. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and found Robert's office completely rearranged. His desk had been pushed against a different wall. His framed photographs had been removed. Ashley smiled and told me the room felt brighter this way. I remember standing there holding 2 bags of groceries, feeling like a visitor inside my own home. Jason always had an explanation. Ashley is only trying to help, Mom. She wants what is best for you. You have been through a lot. Every conversation ended the same way. My concerns were treated like misunderstandings. My objections were treated like overreactions. Slowly, decisions stopped including me. Utility accounts were transferred into Jason's name because it was supposedly more convenient. Ashley requested copies of spare keys in case of emergencies. They encouraged me to take short trips and spend more time away from the house. Looking back now, every piece fits together too neatly. Every suggestion served a purpose. Every change moved me one step farther from control. That evening, after leaving the house, I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town. The room was clean but forgettable. A queen bed, beige walls, a television mounted above a dresser. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at my phone. I called Jason again. Voicemail. I sent a text asking him to call me. No response. Hours passed. Outside my window, cars moved steadily through the parking lot. People arrived carrying suitcases. Families checked in. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Around 9 o'clock that evening, my phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped when I saw Jason's name. I opened the message immediately. It contained only one sentence. Mom, this is for the best. Please try to understand. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The words felt colder than the new lock on my front door. For the first time all day, I stopped feeling confused. Confusion gave way to something else. Something quieter. Something sharper. Because deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Robert would never have allowed this to happen. And if Robert had left anything behind for me, any protection at all, I intended to find it. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. I reached toward the empty side of the bed, expecting to find Robert there like I had for more than 30 years. Then reality settled back over me. The hotel room, the locked house, the message from Jason. I sat quietly and stared through the window as the sky turned from gray to pale blue. Robert had always been the planner in our marriage. Whenever a problem appeared, he approached it calmly. He gathered information first. He never rushed into decisions. As I sipped the bitter hotel coffee, I realized that was exactly what I needed to do. I stopped calling Jason. I stopped texting. If he wanted silence, I would give him silence. Instead, I drove to the house around mid-morning. I parked across the street where I could see the front yard. The curtains were open. Ashley's SUV sat in the driveway. Around 10 o'clock, a delivery truck arrived carrying several large boxes. 2 hours later, another truck pulled up with furniture. New furniture. I watched workers carry pieces into the house Robert and I had spent years decorating together. Every item they carried through that front door felt like another message. They were not acting like people who expected me to come back. They were acting like people who believed they had already won. I sat there for nearly 3 hours. Nobody noticed me. Nobody looked my way. Around lunchtime, Ashley stepped onto the porch holding her phone. She smiled while talking to someone. Then she pointed toward the house. Toward my house. The gesture seemed casual, but it tightened something inside my chest. She looked proud, comfortable, certain. I drove away before she could see me. There was no point confronting her. Not yet. That afternoon, I visited the storage facility Robert rented years earlier. Most people did not know it existed. He used it for old tools, tax records, and boxes that never seemed important enough to keep at home. The manager recognized me immediately. He offered condolences for Robert's passing and handed me the access code. The unit smelled faintly of cardboard and dust. Sunlight filtered through the gaps near the ceiling. Everything looked untouched. I spent hours opening boxes. Old holiday decorations, camping equipment, receipts from home improvement projects, photographs from vacations, memories stacked neatly on metal shelves. Just as I was preparing to leave, I noticed a small wooden box tucked behind several file containers. I had never seen it before. My name was written across the top in Robert's handwriting. My hands froze. Slowly, I carried it to a folding table near the entrance. Inside were several envelopes, a set of keys, and a handwritten letter. Seeing his handwriting again felt like hearing his voice after months of silence. I carefully unfolded the letter. The first line immediately made my heart pound. Margaret, if you are reading this, something has happened that made you question who you can trust. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. The words felt impossible. Robert had written this nearly 2 years earlier according to the date at the top. My eyes moved farther down the page. He explained that he had become concerned about certain conversations regarding the house. Concerned enough to take precautions. Concerned enough to prepare documents and instructions in case I ever needed them. By the time I reached the end of the first page, I no longer felt helpless. For the first time since finding that new lock on my front door, I felt something else entirely. Hope. Because whatever Ashley and Jason believed about the house, Robert had clearly anticipated problems long before I did. And judging from the keys and documents sitting inside that box, he had left behind far more than memories. I took the wooden box back to the hotel and spent most of the evening reading every page Robert had left behind. The letter was longer than I expected. It was not written by a man who was afraid. It was written by a man who had been paying attention. Robert described conversations he had overheard during family gatherings. Small remarks that seemed harmless at the time. Comments about property values. Discussions about inheritance. Casual jokes about what would happen to the house someday. Reading his words felt strange because I remembered many of those moments myself. At the time, I had laughed them off. Robert had not. He wrote that Ashley always seemed unusually interested in the details of ownership. She asked questions about deeds, trusts, and beneficiary designations. She often framed them as curiosity. Robert admitted that at first he thought nothing of it. Then he noticed a pattern. The questions never stopped. More importantly, they always returned to the house. Near the middle of the letter, Robert described a conversation he had with Jason nearly a year before his death. The two of them had been repairing a section of fence in the backyard. According to Robert, Jason mentioned that Ashley believed it would make more sense if the property eventually belonged to them because they planned to raise their family there. The statement itself was not alarming. What troubled Robert was Jason's next comment. He apparently told his father that Ashley believed I would eventually move somewhere smaller and easier to manage. I set the letter down and stared at the hotel wall. Nobody had ever discussed such plans with me. Not once. Yet somehow decisions about my future had already been taking shape without my knowledge. The next envelope contained copies of legal documents. I was not an attorney, but even I could understand their significance. Robert had created a trust years earlier. The house had been transferred into it. More importantly, he had named me as the sole controlling trustee after his death. No one could legally remove me. No one could claim authority over the property without my approval. Attached to the documents was a note in Robert's handwriting. If anyone ever tells you that you do not belong in your own home, verify everything before you believe them. I read that sentence several times. The certainty in his words gave me strength. The following morning, I scheduled an appointment with Harold Collins, the attorney who had handled several matters for Robert over the years. Harold was in his late 60s, thoughtful and meticulous. When I arrived at his office carrying the wooden box, his expression changed immediately. He listened carefully while I explained everything that had happened. He never interrupted. He simply took notes. When I finished, he opened the trust documents and reviewed them one page at a time. The room remained silent except for the sound of turning paper. Finally, he removed his glasses and looked directly at me. "Margaret," he said calmly, "based on everything I am seeing, nobody had the authority to exclude you from that property." A weight lifted from my shoulders. Not because the problem was solved. It was not. But because the doubt was gone. For days, I had questioned my own understanding of what was happening. Now the facts stood in front of me. Harold explained that before taking any action, we needed to gather more information. We needed records, timelines, evidence. He advised patience. As I prepared to leave his office, he handed the documents back to me. "One more thing," he said. "Do not tell them what you found." I paused. "Why not?" Harold gave a small smile. "Because people reveal far more when they think nobody is paying attention." As I walked back to my car, I realized something important. Ashley believed she had already secured the future she wanted. Jason believed I had accepted their decision. Neither of them knew about the box. Neither of them knew about the trust. And neither of them knew that for the first time since I found myself standing outside that locked front door, I was no longer reacting to their plan. I was beginning to understand it. Over the next several days, I followed Harold's advice exactly. I did not confront Ashley. I did not contact Jason. I did not announce what I had discovered. Instead, I watched. It is remarkable how much people reveal when they believe nobody is paying attention. I continued staying at the hotel and kept my routine simple. Every morning, I drove past the house at different times. Every afternoon, I parked far enough away to avoid being noticed. What I saw confirmed my growing suspicions. Ashley was not treating the house like a temporary residence. She was treating it like a prize she had already claimed. New decorations appeared in the windows. Delivery trucks arrived almost daily. Landscapers worked in the front yard. One afternoon, I watched workers carry out several pieces of furniture that had belonged to Robert and me. My chest tightened when I recognized the antique cabinet Robert inherited from his parents. Ashley had once claimed she loved family history. Apparently, she only loved the parts she could control. Meanwhile, Jason remained silent. Not a single phone call. Not a single attempt to explain what had happened. At first, that silence hurt more than being locked out. I kept remembering the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The teenager who helped Robert shovel snow from the driveway every winter. The young man who cried at our kitchen table when he received his first job offer. I kept asking myself how that person had become the man who ignored his mother's messages while strangers carried her belongings through her own front door. The answer arrived unexpectedly 3 days later. Harold called and asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he handed me a folder containing public records he had requested. Most of the documents were routine, but one caught my attention immediately. Several weeks before I had been locked out, Ashley had submitted paperwork related to home improvement permits. The applications described future renovations. Extensive renovations. What shocked me was not the construction itself. It was the timing. The paperwork had been filed nearly a month before my trip to Springfield. Nearly a month before the locks were changed. Nearly a month before anyone suggested I no longer belonged there. They had been planning their future in that house, while smiling across the dinner table from me. Harold pointed to the dates and remained silent. He did not need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. Later that evening, I returned to the storage unit and reread Robert's letter. Certain passages carried new meaning now. He had not been paranoid. He had been observant. He noticed things I overlooked because I always wanted to believe the best about people I loved. As I sat there surrounded by old boxes and family memories, another discovery caught my attention. Tucked beneath the trust documents was a small notebook. Inside, Robert had recorded dates, conversations, and observations spanning more than a year. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sensational. Just careful notes from a careful man. Several entries mentioned concerns about pressure being placed on Jason. Other entries described Ashley's increasing focus on ownership and control. The final pages contained something even more valuable. Names, financial advisors, account numbers, contact information, a complete roadmap of assets connected to the trust. By the time I closed the notebook, I understood why Robert had hidden everything so carefully. He wanted me protected. More importantly, he wanted me informed. For months, Ashley had operated as though information belonged exclusively to her. She assumed I was grieving too deeply to notice what was happening. She assumed age had made me dependent. She assumed silence meant weakness. Sitting alone in that storage unit, I finally stopped feeling like a victim of someone else's decisions. For the first time since all of this began, I felt patient. And patience can be a very powerful thing when the people across from you believe the game is already over. The following week became an exercise in restraint. Every instinct told me to march up to that front door, hold the trust documents in my hand, and demand answers. Instead, I did the opposite. I stayed quiet. Harold assured me that patience would serve me better than outrage. And every day that passed proved he was right. Because the more comfortable Ashley became, the more careless she grew. Through mutual friends and neighbors, bits of information began finding their way back to me. Nobody knew I was collecting those pieces. Nobody knew I was paying attention. One neighbor mentioned seeing contractors measuring rooms inside the house. Another casually mentioned hearing about renovation plans for the kitchen. Someone else told me Ashley had been talking openly about finally having the home she always wanted. The word stung But they also revealed something important. She was no longer hiding her intentions. She genuinely believed the house belonged to her future now. During that same period, I received exactly one message from Jason. It was short, polite, distant. He asked whether I had found a place to stay. Nothing about the locks. Nothing about my belongings. Nothing about why his 72-year-old mother had been forced into a hotel room. I stared at the message for several minutes before setting the phone down without replying. Sometimes silence says more than an argument ever could. Meanwhile, Harold continued gathering records. He reviewed trust documents, property filings, and account histories. Every new piece of information strengthened the same conclusion. My legal position was solid. The problem was not ownership. The problem was timing. We needed the right moment. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. A former neighbor called me after running into Ashley at a local coffee shop. According to her, Ashley had excitedly described an upcoming celebration. A housewarming party. The phrase made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. A housewarming party. In a house she did not legally control. In a house she had no authority to take. The irony would have been amusing if it were not so personal. That evening, Harold and I met again. When I told him about the planned gathering, he leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from him since this situation began. That, he said calmly, may be exactly what we have been waiting for. Over the next several days, I learned more details. The guest list grew. Friends were invited. Family members were invited. Ashley was treating the event as a public declaration that her future had finally begun. What she did not know was that every invitation increased the number of witnesses who would eventually see the truth unfold. I spent those days preparing quietly. I organized documents. I reviewed Robert's notes. I reread his letter more times than I could count. Each page reminded me that he had trusted me to handle difficult situations with dignity. Not anger. Not revenge. Dignity. By the time the weekend arrived, I no longer felt nervous. I no longer felt displaced. I felt ready. Ashley believed she had removed me from the story. Jason believed time would eventually make me accept what happened. Neither of them understood that while they were celebrating, the foundation beneath their plan had already started to crack. And in less than 48 hours, they were about to discover just how much Robert had prepared for the day someone underestimated his wife. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm weather. The kind of day people choose for celebrations. By noon, cars had started filling the driveway. Guests carried gift bags and bottles of wine. Laughter drifted across the front lawn. From a distance, it looked like a happy gathering. If someone had driven past the house, they would have assumed a young family was beginning an exciting new chapter. In a way, that was exactly what Ashley wanted everyone to believe. I sat in a small cafe less than a mile away, watching the time on my phone. Harold sat across from me reviewing a folder that contained copies of every document we might need. Neither of us spoke much. There was no reason to. Everything had already been prepared. Around 2 o'clock, one of my former neighbors called. She had attended the gathering and wanted me to know what was happening. Her voice carried a mixture of sympathy and disbelief. She told me Ashley was giving guests tours of the property. She was proudly describing future renovations. She was pointing out rooms and explaining how she planned to transform them. Then my neighbor paused before sharing something that made me shake my head. According to her, Ashley had referred to the house as something she and Jason had worked very hard to obtain. Obtain. The word lingered in my mind long after the call ended. Robert and I had spent 34 years paying for that house. We worked overtime. We delayed vacations. We repaired things ourselves when money was tight. Every wall carried memories of sacrifices Ashley knew nothing about. Yet there she was, speaking as though the story began with her. An hour later, another message arrived from a different guest. This one included photographs. Tables had been set up in the backyard. Decorations hung from the fence Robert and Jason built years earlier. People smiled for pictures beneath the maple tree Robert planted when Jason graduated from high school. Looking at those images should have made me angry. Strangely, they did not. Instead, they made me feel calm. Because every smiling face in those photographs represented another witness. Every guest attending that celebration would soon learn the truth. By late afternoon, Harold received the final confirmation he had been waiting for. He closed his folder and nodded. "Everything is ready," he said. We left the cafe and drove separately. As we approached the neighborhood, I noticed even more vehicles parked along the street. The party had grown larger than Ashley expected. Music floated through the air. Guests stood in clusters talking and laughing. Several people were gathered on the front porch holding drinks and taking pictures. Nobody noticed my car as I parked half a block away. I remained seated for a moment, looking at the house. My house. The windows reflected the afternoon sunlight exactly as they had thousands of times before. For a brief second, I thought about Robert. I wished he were there beside me. Then I remembered the letter, the notebook, the trust. In many ways, he was beside me. He had prepared for this moment long before any of us realized it was coming. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the neighbor attending the party. Just 6 words. Ashley is making a big announcement. I looked up toward the house. Guests were beginning to gather. In the backyard, chairs were being arranged. Conversations quieted. Whatever Ashley planned to say, she clearly wanted an audience. Harold stepped out of his car and adjusted his jacket. He glanced toward me and gave a small nod. The moment we had waited for had finally arrived. And within the next few minutes, the celebration Ashley spent weeks planning was about to become something nobody there would ever forget. Guests slowly gathered around the backyard patio as Ashley stepped forward with a glass in her hand. The conversations faded. The laughter quieted. Even from a distance, I could see the confidence in her posture. She looked completely at ease. Jason stood beside her, smiling politely as friends and relatives settled into their seats. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Not because he was innocent. He was not. But because he had convinced himself that avoiding the truth was the same thing as escaping it. Ashley cleared her throat and thanked everyone for coming. She spoke about fresh beginnings. She spoke about family. She spoke about the future. Listening from across the yard, I was struck by how easily some people can rewrite history when they think nobody will challenge them. Then she began describing plans for the property. New paint, a remodeled kitchen, expanded outdoor entertaining areas. Each sentence carried the assumption that every decision belonged to her now. Several guests nodded approvingly. Others smiled and raised their glasses. Nobody knew what had happened behind the scenes. Nobody knew why the woman who had spent decades in that house was nowhere to be seen. Ashley finally lifted her glass higher. Here is to new chapters, she said, and to building a future in a home that truly belongs to our family. That was the moment Harold looked at me and quietly said, "Now." We began walking toward the backyard entrance. At first, nobody noticed us. Conversations resumed. Guests returned to their drinks. Then someone near the gate recognized me. The expression on her face changed immediately. Her reaction drew attention from others. One by one, heads turned. Conversations stopped. By the time Ashley noticed me, the entire atmosphere had shifted. The smile disappeared from her face. Jason looked as though all the color had drained from it. Neither of them had expected me to appear. Harold stepped forward calmly and introduced himself. His voice remained professional and measured. He did not raise it. He did not accuse anyone. He simply explained that certain legal matters required immediate clarification. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. Ashley attempted to laugh. She claimed there had been a misunderstanding. She claimed everything had already been resolved privately. Harold opened his folder. The sound of paper turning seemed unusually loud in the sudden silence. He explained the trust structure Robert had established years earlier. He explained the ownership protections. He explained who possessed legal authority over the property. Then he explained who did not. Each statement landed like a stone dropped into still water. The reactions around us were impossible to ignore. Guests exchanged glances. Several people looked directly at Ashley. Others stared at Jason. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The facts were speaking for themselves. Ashley's confidence began to unravel. She insisted she believed she had permission. She insisted she was acting in everyone's best interest. Harold responded with documents. Dates. Records. Signatures. The truth required no dramatic performance. It simply existed. Jason finally looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time since all of this began, he seemed to understand the reality of what had happened. Not the version he told himself. The actual reality. The trust. The planning. The months of preparation Robert had quietly put in place. Around us, the celebration had completely dissolved. The music had stopped. The conversations had vanished. Nobody cared about decorations or renovation plans anymore. They cared about the truth. And as Harold closed the folder and handed me a copy of the documents, I realized something remarkable. The moment I had imagined for weeks did not feel triumphant. It felt peaceful, because the truth no longer belonged inside a storage box. It was finally standing in the open where everyone could see it. After most of the guests quietly left, the backyard felt strangely empty. Decorations still hung from the fence. Half-finished drinks remained on tables. Chairs sat scattered across the lawn. Just an hour earlier, everyone had been celebrating a future that no longer existed. Ashley stood near the patio staring at the ground. The confidence she carried for weeks had disappeared. Jason remained silent beside her. For the first time since Robert passed away, neither of them seemed interested in explaining their actions. They simply looked exhausted. Harold spoke with them privately for several minutes while I waited near the maple tree. The same tree Robert planted all those years ago. The same tree that had witnessed birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, and family dinners. Standing beneath its branches, I felt closer to Robert than I had in months. Not because I was winning anything, because his voice seemed present in every decision I had made. Patient, calm, careful. Eventually, Harold approached me and confirmed that the next steps were already underway. The legal questions had answers. The documents were clear. The trust remained intact. The property remained protected. Most importantly, my rights had never disappeared, no matter how many people acted as though they had. As the evening sun began to sink lower, I walked toward the front porch. For a moment, I stopped and looked at the front door. The same door I had stood outside weeks earlier holding a key that no longer worked. I remembered the confusion, the disbelief, the feeling of being erased from my own life. It seemed impossible that so much had changed in such a short time. A locksmith arrived shortly afterward. The process was simple, professional, quiet. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting, no scenes, just paperwork, authorization, and a few turns of a screwdriver. When he finished, he handed me a new key. I held it in my palm for several seconds. Such a small object, yet it carried the weight of everything that had happened. Slowly, I inserted it into the lock. This time it turned. The sound was soft, ordinary, but to me it felt like the closing chapter of a very long story. I stepped inside. The house smelled different. New candles, fresh paint samples, other people's plans. Yet beneath all of that, it was still home. The photographs remained on the mantel. Robert's favorite chair still sat beside the window. The hallway floor still creaked in the same place. Some things had changed. Others never would. I walked through each room slowly, not inspecting, remembering. In the kitchen, I touched the countertop where Jason used to do homework after school. In the dining room, I paused beside the table where Robert and I spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing. Upstairs, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and allowed myself a long breath. Peace settled over me in a way I had not experienced since Robert's death. Later that night, after everyone else had gone, Jason asked if he could speak with me. He looked older than I remembered. Regret has a way of doing that. He apologized. Not perfectly, not eloquently, but sincerely. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him something Robert once told me. Trust is built slowly and damaged quickly. Rebuilding it takes time. Jason nodded. He understood. Whether our relationship would fully recover remained uncertain. Some questions cannot be answered in a single conversation. But healing begins when people finally stop pretending. Long after the house became quiet again, I sat alone in the living room and looked around. Weeks earlier, they believed my silence meant surrender. They thought age had made me powerless. They thought locking a door would end the story. They were wrong. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is patience. Sometimes it is wisdom. And sometimes it is simply the space a person needs before reminding the world exactly who they are.